Democratic senators are now threatening to oppose legislation that's needed to avoid another government shutdown following another deadly shooting that took place in Minnesota by a federal agent. And Saturday's shooting of Alex Preddy is now the second deadly encounter involving federal agents in Minneapolis this month. And it comes as anti-ICE protests continue. And as Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz is now deploying the National Guard to support local authorities. So what in the world is it going to take to keep Minneapolis from becoming a powder keg? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Brad Knott. He serves on several House committees, including the Judiciary Committee, as well as Homeland Security. He represents the 13th Congressional District of the great state of North Carolina. He also served as a federal prosecutor before going to Congress. Congressman Knott, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Hey, Jody, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, listen, the situation there in Minneapolis and Minnesota as a whole obviously is continuing to escalate. And now, in the midst of all that, Democrats are steering us toward another potential government shutdown all over the funding of ICE issue. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, it's one of those things, Jody. Unfortunately, the entire Democratic Party has been mobilized for a few primary purposes. First, it's to defend open-ended migration. They are the party of mass migration. Their party cannot survive without mass migration. And they are trying to stop the president in his efforts to enforce existing immigration law. And then secondly, every member of that party has united insofar as they are trying to stop President Trump at every turn, even when what President Trump is doing has 80 to 20% support amongst the country. Removing illegal aliens who are dangerous, that is a tremendously common sense and popular issue. But the Democrats, especially in deep blue areas like Minneapolis, St. Paul, they're united in trying to obstruct the president no matter what the issue is. And when you combine those two realities, it's no surprise that they are going to go to the mat and try to deny ICE and Homeland Security the funding they need to operate. And it's very, very concerning to me, and it's very concerning to the country.
Yeah, and on top of all that, the concern of a potential government shutdown all over again. Do you think that's where we're headed?
I don't know that we can avoid it insofar as the Democratic Party is top to bottom united in this front. And, Minnesota and Minneapolis specifically has become a powder keg, unfortunately. And in terms of ways to avoid it, you asked the question, what would it take to prevent this? Just do not obstruct federal law enforcement from doing their jobs, from enforcing the law, and we would have none of these problems. But the Democrats are united in inflaming the situation. They are dragging this out. They are obstructing federal law enforcement in terms of immigration enforcement, and they're doing so for political reasons. And when politics is your barometer, shutting the government down is a very easy decision to make, and that's where they're headed.
Wow. And while all this is happening, you have kind of on the other side of the coin now, Governor Tim Walz has activated the National Guard, something that, quite frankly, I never anticipated he would do. So what's your reaction to that, and what kind of impact do you think the National Guard would have on the ground there? Is this a good thing?
Shame on Tim Walz. He and Keith Ellison and Mayor Frey are the ones that have really instigated this. They've dumped gasoline all over the fire around their state, rather than tell people to essentially to stay home, do not inflame the situation. If you want to protest, do not do so by obstructing federal law enforcement. He has ordered his own local law enforcement not to assist, which is unheard of. That's unprecedented. So he and Keith Ellison have really made the decision to inflame the situation and to endanger federal law enforcement. And this activation, I'm curious as to why it's happening. Is he doing it to try to obstruct, like he has been advocating for recently? Is he doing it to try to keep the peace? Because if he's trying to do this in a way that will keep the peace, I wish he would use his microphone to encourage all people in Minnesota to assist federal law enforcement in getting rid of these dangerous illegal aliens. But he hasn't done that so far, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, good point. I haven't even thought of this as potentially being used for further obstruction. My assumption was that this was for peace. So you bring up an excellent point there that we'll be watching to see how the National Guard is used there. And now we have a federal judge that's considering a pause to the Trump administration's immigration crackdown there in Minnesota. So what are your thoughts on this? Could we see a suspension perhaps in the administration's surge in agents there?
No, it's completely in line with precedent and their constitutional authorities. Of course, the far left has opposed, again, the president at every step, whether it's citizens, whether it's elected officials locally, elected officials in Washington, and unfortunately, people on the judiciary as well. But the president has won time and again as he appeals these far left rulings. And again, we're talking about enforcing existing law, what the Minnesota government under Tim Walz has refused to do. This is not controversial at all. So if the judge does issue a cease and desist or a stop order, it'll be overturned. It'll just be one more hurdle that the president is having to clear.
Very interesting. I wish we could go on. There's so many questions I have for you on this, but if we can, let's switch gears because I mentioned this coming into our segment here. One of the things that lit the fuse for all of this is the investigation into widespread fraud in Minnesota, where estimates are up to some $9 billion in taxpayer funds that in essence have been stolen. So can you tell us where we are in that investigation? Are we going to be seeing more arrests anytime soon, do you think?
Well, Jody, it's very interesting. You look at the incentive structures at play here. Do you think that Keith Ellison would prefer that there be chaos and distraction at the federal level with this immigration enforcement? Or do you think he would prefer a quiet scene working with the president? Of course, he is incentivized on his own calculus to stir up trouble, to cause a ruckus, to disrupt the federal arm, because it was established beyond any question that Keith Ellison was integral into this Somalian fraud operation. There were recordings, there was testimony. He essentially guaranteed legal cover for illegal activity. There was recording numerous times where he said, essentially, if I don't cover you, the money will stop. And it's an unbelievable scheme that we've seen here. You have a group of people from Somalia that have stolen what equates to essentially 100% of the entire Somalian GDP from the American taxpayer.
Unbelievable.
It's outrageous. It's
outrageous. All right, we've got just a little over a minute left, and I just got to get your reaction to the church protesters that took place. There have been 3 people who have been arrested so far, yet an appeals court has rejected the Justice Department's push to charge others in that, including former CNN anchor Don Lemon. As a former federal prosecutor yourself and now a member of the House Judiciary, are we going to see more arrests, even potentially still? Lennon may not be out of the woods?
Well, the investigation needs to continue, and if there was a coordinated effort to disrupt people's rights, there need to be charges. But what's glaring here is the total absence of local law enforcement. If you attack the right or something associated with the right, the local law enforcement gives you a blank check, and it's disgraceful.
Wow. Well, it is disgraceful. I'll tell you, there's just absolutely so much happening just in Minnesota alone.
Yep.
I tell you, but you've got your hands full in Congress. You've got so much going on. North Carolina Congressman Brad Knott, it is always an honor to have you joining us here on Washington Watch. We deeply appreciate it. And thank you for joining us and giving your input.
Thank you, Jody. Take care.